When I was 16, I was invited to one of those hardcore Christian youth indoctrination weekends where they take away your watch so you'll never know when the next meal is. And you can't smoke cigarettes, so after a while, everyone's got a halo. You hallucinate this circle of light around their head, and you get hugged by a lot of fat people and become convinced that you love everyone. But it turns out you're just sleep-deprived and hungry. And you wish that the fat people would lie down in a pile on the floor so you could use them as pillows and take a nap. But then everybody runs around in circles, and you have a cigarette behind the outhouse, and you realize there is a way back. You'll be yourself again someday. Anyway, on the first night there, they put out a good spread of camp-style food and said that we could take as much as we wanted. But when we sat down, they told us that we weren't allowed to eat it yet. So there we sat with our dinners in front of us. Canned vegetables and canned meats and whatnot. And they gradually stopped steaming and looked more like what they were, byproducts. And while our food visibly congealed and puckered before our eyes, we heard a story. A man died, and an angel brought him to a place where there was a table piled high with good food. There were people around the table with big plates and heaping portions in front of them, but none of them were actually eating. They looked miserable. Then the man realized that the people at the table didn't have elbows. Their arms were one straight bone from shoulder to wrist, so they could get food onto their plates, but not into their mouths. Then the angel brought him to another place. The same table piled high with food. The people around it also had no elbow joints, and yet the man saw that they were eating happily. They were feeding each other. The moral of the story was that hell was a place where people thought only of themselves, and heaven was a place where people were more focused on serving their neighbors. A nice story, I thought, preparing to dig in. But the lesson wasn't over yet, and we hadn't even said a lengthy prayer over the food yet, which in my case would have been, "Dear God, please resurrect this Spam as a steak." We were instructed to turn to the person next to us, which in my case was another awkward, terrified 16-year-old boy, who also wished that he was anywhere else in the world, or outer space, or hell for that matter. And we had to feed each other. And I thought, this is hell. Being an awkward teenager, surrounded by Christians, who won't allow you to deal with your bodily needs in the simplest way, and instead force you to put on a vaguely homoerotic display, with another terrified teen while they smile benignly at you. I won't lie to you. The boy I sat with at dinner that night then stole a canoe and paddled for home. I never found out whether or not he made it. That is a true story. As a teenager, I did not get hassled much about heaven and hell, even though both of my parents are ordained ministers. They never sat me down and seriously pretended to know what happens after we die, and for that, I am eternally grateful. As a teenager, I was interested in girls. I thought kissing a nice girl was like paradise, being ignored was like hell, and being just friends was like a long, painful purgatory. A purgatory where I, every so often, spent 10,000 years. Meanwhile, other teenagers were being hassled about the afterlife, being taught that our embodied existence is just a test, that God had built billions of stars and solar systems, and the planet Earth, and the oceans, and the mountains, and the animals, and the plants, and mosquitoes, and microbes, all as an elaborate obstacle course, so that human beings could run through it and find out their score, which ultimately came down to pass or fail. And then the big twist at the end, that it was all fake. The whole universe you thought you lived in was just a smoke and mirrors illusion. And what's real is the afterworld. And that's where you're going to be for all eternity. And of course, this obstacle course wasn't made to be easy. It's filled with temptation, which wouldn't be such a problem except you've got to go through the obstacle course in the body of an animal, a primate. And your primate body will always be telling you that you want food and sex, that you want to mate with anything that walks and eat anything that doesn't. And sometimes this mating will produce babies, little hungry sociopaths, whose nightly cries will turn you into a sleep-deprived, hungry sociopath, and nothing seems to matter except feeding that baby so that your primate body can get some rest. And if navigating through God's obstacle course in this monkey suit wasn't hard enough, you've got this gigantic brain. And it wants to ask all these questions. Were there dinosaurs on Noah's Ark? Shut up. And it wants to work on equations. If 3 is 1 and 1 is 3, what's 2 plus 2? Shut up. You're going to get me sent to detention. And if God loves me and wants me to succeed, why did He put me in this monkey body and give me this blasphemous brain? Well, God's been quietly resentful of humanity ever since someone stole a piece of fruit. Are you telling me that God, the Almighty Creator of heaven and earth, is holding a grudge against me because someone I never met stole a piece of fruit 6,000 years ago? God can forgive all things, but He can't forget that piece of fruit. But why is He blaming me for it? That is racial profiling. If God really distrusts the entire human race because someone stole this piece of fruit, if all people are guilty until proven innocent, not to mention, by the way, that He made me look like a monkey. He put this wacko magnet down there that drags me around. Couldn't we call it even? And if I don't pass this final exam, I'll be burned for all eternity? And the answers don't make sense, and it's multiple choice, but 1 is 3, and 3 is 1? Heaven must be empty. Streamers, party favors, cookies and punch, but not one single person. Because it's impossible to pass this test. It's rigged. Then it turns out there's a magic spell that neutralizes God's judgment. You can do whatever you want. Evict single mothers, scam the elderly, torch a forest, gun down strangers. There is a code, a secret password that you can use to hack into paradise. Bypass all of God's encryptions and firewalls just by typing JOHN 3:16. And if you're forgetful, you might want to get this secret code on a bumper sticker, or a tattoo, or a sign to wave at sporting events, where John 3:16 means something like, crush your enemies, see them driven before you, and hear the lamentations of their women. Anyway, you use this magic spell to anesthetize the three-headed God at the gates, and you're in. But then what? What do you do for all eternity? Do we really need all eternity to think about what we did during our life? All of our stories would get old so fast. Did I ever tell you about the time I guess? What about the time I guess? I've heard all of your stories. We've been sitting here for 600 years. Every divorce, every mispromotion, every hanging, 10 times. So, it feels a little cooler out than yesterday. Dave, we're in hell. No, this is heaven. They said so at the gate. No, it must be hell, because I'm so bored. Eternity. An endless post-game show with exhaustive commentary and really slow motion replays. During life, we're always in a hurry. We're always pressed for time. But what do you do when you've got too much time? Are there really Vikings in Valhalla who've been singing 900 bottles of beer on the wall for 1,000 years? Because that song gets old before you even reach 96. You know, the Vikings had this belief that if you were a warrior and died in combat, you could go to this place where you could drink all night, fight all day, hack each other to pieces, and then get put back together and drink all night again. But I feel like even for the Vikings, this would get old after a while. And it turns out that the 72 virgins of Muslim paradise might be a mistranslation of the Arabic word auri, which probably means white grapes. 72 white grapes. That'll keep you busy for all of 5 minutes. The Quran actually never mentions 72 of anything. It just says that you'll get to sit in a garden with your wife, which sounds fantastic. As a college teacher myself, I would happily choose spending eternity with Elizabeth instead of 72 teenagers. But she's already heard all of my jokes. And any jokes I haven't told her yet probably aren't fit for paradise. Then there's the Eastern belief in reincarnation. That you wear a meat suit until it falls apart and then you put on a new one. Reincarnation literally means new meat. But nobody ever says that they were reincarnated from someone who starved to death on the streets of New Delhi. It's always Cleopatra or some other ancient celebrity. And nobody ever thinks about getting reincarnated as a mosquito, which is probably what happens to bankers and paparazzi. They come back as some blood-sucking parasite and actually get squashed for it. Yes, sir, your CT scan shows that you have a tapeworm. And the Christian meter shows that the tapeworm is actually a reincarnation of J.P. Morgan. I recently read that almost a quarter of American Christians secretly believe in reincarnation, which means that after they die, they'll be burning in hell for accepting that heathen doctrine. But what can you do when the alternative is playing a harp for 1,000,000 years? It's say, Coach, please put me back in the game. As I've been writing this sermon, I've been teaching in my world religions class about some traditional African religions. Vincent Malago, a professor in Zaire, writes that in African tribal cultures, the dead remain on the land as spirits to guide the community. Living means, he writes, participating in the sacred life of the ancestors. It means a prolonging of the ancestors and preparing one's own prolonging through descendants. There is a true continuation of the family and of the individual after death. The dead form the invisible element in the family, the clan, the tribe. Given my choice of afterlives, I would take that. I don't want to sit on a cloud for all eternity. I would rather be down here, whispering into the ears of my children. Because that's the immortality that I believe in. That's the continuation of my genes and my ideas, carried on by my offspring. And even if my body dies, I would want to be there when my children grow and make decisions and raise their children. No amount of pie in the sky would mean more to me than that. And I love pie. Writing this sermon, I was sitting in my grandmother's chair and hoping that she could be there with me, throwing in the occasional idea. My grandparents parents were Hungarian Holocaust survivors. And my grandfather was a great deadpan comic. Which I guess, when you're telling funny stories about getting locked up and shot by the Nazis, deadpan is the only way to do it. And sometimes when I'm at my desk, and suddenly some great punchline pops up out of nowhere and I'm scrambling to get it typed, I wonder if they might be in the room with me. I was in a car accident. I had only been driving for 2 years, and I was 33 years old. I was driving to work. The car in front of mine stopped, waiting for an opening to pull into a driveway on the left. I stopped also. But just as the car in front of me got moving again, I felt a little tap from the back. Getting out of the Jeep, I saw that my left taillight was cracked, and the sedan behind me. The car behind mine looked like a giant robot had taken a big chomp out of it. The hood was every kind of crushed. The car was totaled. Then I saw behind it a mauled pickup truck, one side of the back carriage torn out. And further back across the street, a minivan in a ditch. A voice from inside the wrecked sedan let me know that the driver was alive. It turned out everyone was fine. I lifted her through a window. She was about 80 years old and weighed about 80 pounds. Gradually, we pieced the story together. This elderly woman had cruise control set for 45, and her pacemaker stopped. Her car, with a cadaver behind the wheel, entered the oncoming lane at a curve and knocked the minivan into a ditch, bounced back and wrestled with the pickup truck, then vented the last of its fury on my left taillight. And sometime in the midst of this, her airbag exploded, jolting the pacemaker back into its rhythm. It turned out we were beyond fortunate. It was that rarest of car accidents where not only was nobody hurt, but someone who was dead beforehand was actually alive after the crash. And then a miracle happened. That woman promised never to drive again. True story. I arrived at the college that day. In time to teach my religious studies class, I told them what had happened, and a student blurted out, "Did you ask her what she saw?" No, it never occurred to me. Because I don't believe that anyone can tell us what really happens after we die. And I don't care what anybody says that they saw while their brain was short-circuited. I was very fortunate growing up that I never got hassled by my parents about heaven and hell. My father, an Episcopal priest, and my mother, an ordained UCC minister, they met in seminary, but they never encouraged me to be saved. They just wanted me to be employed. Get a job. Work hard so you can get a better job and work harder. And if my children asked me about heaven and hell, I would probably say, work hard, stay busy, haul that stone till they send you to the glue factory, and let God worry about what happens next. Because whether or not there's an afterlife, I want to spend part of this life drinking margaritas with Elizabeth without our grown-up, unemployed children pressing us to put our clothes in the dryer so they can put their clothes in the washer. And then saying, by the way, Mom, Dad, put some underwear on. This is gross. Hey, if you don't want to see your elderly parents drinking margaritas naked, go get a job and get your own apartment. Because this life might be all we've got. And I want to find paradise tonight. Because I've got work.